Okay, the 6 subscales for perfectionism. Let's talk about my thesis. So back when I was going for my master's degree at Springfield College, my master's was in exercise science and sports studies with a concentration in sports psychology. And I was very blessed to be able to do my master's thesis, my final study on perfectionism and anxiety in athletes. And we found that athletes that were more perfectionistic tended to get more nervous and they performed worse. So how do we do this? We used a perfectionism inventory and we used an anxiety inventory. Now, what I want to talk about is perfectionism. So perfectionism wasn't measured as just one single construct. Perfectionism was actually made up of 6 subscales. Okay, so you could look at them as 6 parts of perfectionism. And when I made the last Mindset Monday, I didn't include one of them. It slipped my mind, so I wanted to make a video about that now. So the 6 subscales of perfectionism were personal standards, organization, doubts about actions, concern over mistakes, parental criticism, and parental expectations. So all 6 of those made up the construct of perfectionism, at least according to the Frost multidimensional perfectionism scale. So if someone put together a perfectionism inventory and it got approved by the scientific or psychological community, and it got the approval, and that's kind of the construct for perfectionism. So just to talk about each of those, very interesting that 2 of those subscales actually were related to positive outcomes. So athletes actually did well when they had high personal standards, not unreasonable high, of course, and higher levels of organization. Again, not unreasonably high. So as long as it was tempered, as long as there was a balance, high personal standards, high organization were actually associated with less nervousness and increased outcomes, better outcomes. On the other hand, concern over mistakes and doubts about actions, they were directly related to anxiety, to nervousness, and of course then leading to a bad performance. Now, 2 of the subscales, interestingly, had nothing to do with the individual by themselves, but their parents' role in their athletic performance. So parental expectations and parental criticism were both linked with higher levels of anxiety, with higher levels of nervousness, which led to worse outcomes. Now, it's important to remember about those 2 parental subscales, parental criticism and parental expectations. That's not so much the exact level of the parents' expectations or the exact level of the parents' criticism, but it's important to note that's the athlete's perception of the parents' criticism level. That's the athlete's perception of the parents' expectations. So it's important to understand that when we're dealing with how a parent, and you can even extend this to a coach, how a parent affects an athlete's performance, or how a coach affects the athlete's performance due to expectations or criticism, there's a subjective element to that. It's how the athlete perceives your level of expectations and criticism. And they're not bad in and of themselves. Okay, so let's look specifically at parental expectations. So having high parental expectations or having high levels of coaching expectations, that could be a good thing, right? My coach believes in me. My parent believes in me. So they have high expectations. So that could be good. Or it could be bad. If we're looking at it like, oh, my parent has too high of expectations. My coach has too high of expectations, right? So it's important to understand the subjective element there, that it's the perception. So how do we make that more concrete? How do we put some shoe leather on that and build that into our mindset, our mindset curriculum? As far as the parent expectations and parental criticism, we created 5 questions, 5 simple yes/no questions to assess the levels of criticism and expectations, or at least perceived level of expectations and criticism. And then we also have a series of 5 questions that go along with that, a series of more open-ended questions. So we have closed-ended questions, we have open-ended questions. And we took that same thing, so that's the parent mindset guide, that's Self-Knowledge Week 10. And also in Self-Knowledge Week 10, we have a coach's mindset guide asking those same questions. So even though the perfectionism subscale, my thesis, didn't contain this, I made the assumption, I think I'm at liberty here to make the assumption that what applies to the parents could definitely be applied to the coaches. I know there were certain coaches that I had that made me think a little bit more, that made me a little bit more perfectionistic. Some coaches were more kind of let loose and compete freely, and other coaches was everything had to be just right. And again, each kid is going to respond differently to it. There's no, it's not an objective law here. It's what works. It's what works for the athlete and the coach. So there's always a level of a goodness of fit between the parent and the athlete and the coach and the athlete. Obviously, you can't select your parents. You have some say in selecting your coach sometimes. So it's important to the point is this, it's important to get on the same page with our parents and with our coaches, because it impacts our levels of perfectionism, which impacts our level of nervousness and anxiety, which impacts our performance. So it's very important we hit on self-knowledge week 10, the parent mindset guide, and the coach's mindset guide. And throughout our mindset program, we're addressing those 4 other levels of perfectionism, the 2 that hurt, concern over mistakes and doubts about actions, and the 2 that tend to help, organization and personal standards. Hope that helps. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.